Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel, Home with Kimberly. Today I am in the mood for some comfort food. When am I not in the mood for comfort food? We are making one of my family favorites, which is chicken and dumplings. This is so easy to make, it's so flavorful, it's just so warm and comforting. It's just one of those go-to meals that you really love on hand in your cooking arsenal. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let's get started. Okay, so to start out, fill up a pan with some water, and I have just some chicken breast that I am going to stick down in here. Now, this is just one way I can prepare this dish. Oftentimes I will use bone-in chicken because I just love the flavor and the texture when using that, but I didn't have any bone-in, so boneless is fine. And I am just sprinkling some salt and pepper on the chicken before I stick it down into the boiling water. Okay, in a separate stock pot, you want to add your chicken broth. I usually add a couple of boxes of these. Just however much you're making for this recipe is fine, and you want to get that on a simmer. Okay, so now we want to start on the dumplings. You're going to get a large bowl, and I usually start out adding a couple of cups of flour to the bowl, and you can have this recipe or you can double this recipe. It just depends on how much you're wanting to make. So that's 2 cups of flour, and to that I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of butter. And then I also added in a half a teaspoon, I believe, of baking powder. And as I said, add your dry ingredients first and then add in your butter. And then I add in a little more salt. And then at this point I start to try to cut in that butter. Now I was using a fork because I could not find my pastry cutter, and this is a pastry cutter. I'm telling you, if you have one of those, it makes it so much easier. I couldn't find mine until after I actually finished making this, so I made do with a fork. Next comes the milk, and I fill up a cup of milk. I usually probably use closer to 3/4 of that, but I just kind of eyeball it. I start mixing that up until it all starts to come together. You don't want this too wet and you don't want it too dry. So I'm going to kind of show you how mine looks here, and this is about the perfect consistency. See how it's kind of sticky? That's what you want. So now we are going to heavily flour a surface. Make sure you're working on a surface large enough to roll this out with the rolling pin. Don't be afraid to use quite a bit of flour. This is one of those recipes that you can do a lot of flour and it's not going to mess up the taste of your food. Next, let's just dump that dough out onto the floured surface. You can put some of that flour on your hands to make it come out easier. It is going to be a little bit sticky, and again, don't be afraid to add more flour on top of that. And I like to also add flour, a decent amount, to my rolling pin before I start rolling it. And as you start rolling this, you know, if you need to flip this over a couple times, and sometimes I will do that just so it won't stick on the one side. So you see I'm flipping it right now. That just keeps it from really sticking to that counter. And then roll it out to however thin or thick you want to make these dumplings. That is totally up to you. So now I'm going to use my handy dandy pizza cutter, and I'm just going to start cutting this into strips, long ways and across. You can make these whatever size you like. They don't have to be perfect, just get them cut into little rectangles. Next, I'm going to grab a plate, which I'm going to heavily flour, and then I'm going to start putting down a layer of dumplings. And between each layer of dumplings, you're going to heavily flour each layer, and that's going to really help you to get a nice thick sauce. Now I'm going to come back over here to my chicken. It is done, so I'm just going to let that sit out on a cutting board, and when that cools off a little bit, I'm going to start slicing that into bite-sized pieces. My chicken broth is now ready for me to start adding in my dumplings. So I just carefully, sometimes I start out one at a time adding the dumplings, but as I start becoming more impatient, I'll start taking a few handfuls at a time and putting them in, and then I'll just start stirring that. When I get several in there, stir that around, get that flour incorporated, and then I will add in the rest of the dumplings and give that a good stir. And the last thing to do is add back in your chopped chicken and stir that around, and I usually let this simmer for about 15 to 20 minutes. I also will adjust my seasonings at this point and taste it to see that it's where I want it to be. And here is the finished product, you guys. It is so flavorful, especially for such a simple, easy recipe. And I really hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. Give me a thumbs up, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!